What's up, everyone? Welcome into DodgerHeads, presented by DodgerBlue.com, part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network. My name is Jeff Spiegel, joined today by Mike Petriello of MLB.com, formerly a Dodgers content creator. Mike, the season is just about here. We getting pretty excited over there?
Listen, formerly a Dodgers content creator. I still make some Dodgers
It's true.
content sometimes, but I'm not focused on it full time. Yes, I'm very excited. I want to see if the Dodgers can live up to all this hype.
You've graduated to the big leagues. Obviously, today we're going to talk about some Dodgers specific content, but I mean, just to start off, what has that transition been like? I'm curious, kind of going from being entirely focused on one specific team to sort of having to / getting to broaden your horizons a bit.
It's been great. I mean, I live in New York, so a lot fewer late nights being
Fair.
required to stay up to the end of Dodger games. I miss having a team that I can root for as much as I used to. I'm still a Dodger fan. I don't pretend I'm not, but it's not quite the same. But on the other hand, having the ability to find story ideas for 29 other teams and also the league, and not just trying to find something about one team, is really opened up a lot of doors for me.
I love it. I love it. Well, as I kind of hinted at, you had an article that came out last week on MLB.com talking about Mookie Betts, the shortstop. And obviously, as you can imagine, this story has been covered on sites like ours from just about every angle imaginable. But what I loved about your piece, kind of breaking down how did he actually do at shortstop, was sort of the details of here's how many opportunities he had, and here was the fielding percentage. And so I want to get into that, but I'm curious, just as I back up, as a guy who, as you said, roots for the Dodgers and yet is still like looking at this probably more so from a league-wide perspective. What did you make of maybe the process that the Dodgers had or maybe didn't have as far as how they came to the conclusion that Gavin Lux wasn't going to be the shortstop?
I didn't like the idea of going with Gavin Lux in the first place,
Okay.
really. And I think, we've been watching the Andrew Friedman Dodgers for enough years to extremely give them the benefit of the doubt, right? Like
Yeah.
they generally know what they're doing. They're really, really good at this. So when I was looking at this, like even, a year ago, after Lux got hurt and thinking, boy, they really believe in him, huh? And I'm not sure I see it. I think the bat was like good when he was healthy, but it wasn't great. And it's not the first time he's had throwing issues. Like I like him a lot as a second baseman. I wasn't
Okay.
sure about him as a shortstop, but obviously it's like you're going to give them the benefit of the doubt that they know what they're doing. And I guess I would say it's both, I didn't like the process that got them there, but I did like that they weren't really willing to wait around. They're like, this is probably not working. We
Yeah.
can't go into the season like this. If we're going to ask Mookie to do this, we can't tell him the day before opening day, right?
Yeah.
We got to get some time. I mean, they're so fortunate that they have an all-world superstar who's
Yeah.
capable of doing this. There are so many other great players in today's game, but you wouldn't go to, I don't know, Aaron Judge or Juan Soto and be like, hey, boys, you're playing shortstop today. Just
Right.
that can't happen. The fact that Mookie Betts is not only able to do this, but willing, I think it's just like another notch in his belt of how great a player he is.
Yeah, I think it was Fabian Ardaya or Ken Rosenthal, excuse me, at The Athletic. He had a piece up kind of breaking down the fact that, like, can we just acknowledge what you just pointed out, Mike, that not only is Mookie Betts potentially capable of this, how many superstars are willing to do something in which they could dramatically fail at and kind of embarrass themselves? Not to mention for a guy who has the resume that Mookie Betts does defensively, for him to be willing to do this, I think is kind of a subplot that hasn't really been talked about.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it's based on the way he came into the pros. He's always sounded, I'm trying to think of the right word here, like I don't know if it's salty or defensive, but not really happy that the Red Sox moved him off shortstop in the first place. Because as I remember, the scouting report said he doesn't have the arm for it. Well, I think he's proven over the years playing right field, he extremely has the arm for it.
Yeah.
And like there's a version of this where the Red Sox infield at the time was like Mookie at short and Xander Bogaerts at third.
Yeah.
And imagine that, and it didn't happen. And then obviously at second base they had Pedroia, so he got moved off of there to the outfield, and he became a great outfielder. But he's talked for a lot of years now about I'm an infielder, I just happen to be playing the outfield.
Yeah.
And the skill set aside, there's just not that many other guys who approach it that way, right? Like every great position player at least probably played shortstop a little bit when they were a kid, at least the right-handed guys, not necessarily the lefties. And that ends pretty quickly, once you decide you're not a shortstop. But for Mookie, it never really ended. He came into the pros thinking I'm an infielder. So for him to go back, it's almost like a return home. I would love to know what he really thinks about second versus short. I'm sure he's saying it's no different, right? It's definitely a little bit different.
Yeah. I'm curious, like, as we look at this, You kind of hinted at the defensive capacity and Gavin Lux's ability to hit. Like, I guess one question I have is, were you surprised that the decision was to move Mookie to short rather than to just put Miguel Rojas at short and leave Mookie at second?
There is an argument for that, right? The argument is that you take your superstar and you build around him, and you
Yeah.
don't move him around to accommodate
Right.
lesser players. I think the answer to that is twofold, right? Number one is that Mookie obviously has no issue with this. He doesn't view it, as far as we can tell, as a burden on him. He seems happy to do it. And the second is that, Rojas's glove is pretty good, but that bat it was really bad last year,
Yeah.
and it's like, if they still believe in Lux's bat, which I'm willing to believe more than I am to believe it as him as a shortstop, then you don't want to totally, you'd essentially be stunting his career, right? He didn't play it all last year. Now you're not going to play him at shortstop. What are you going to send him back to AAA? You got to at least give him a shot. And I think the nice thing here is none of this has to be set in stone. You do it for a month, right? If Lux isn't hitting at all, if the defense is terrible, you can make moves. You can play Rojas more down the line. You can make a trade. I think people like to look at all these rosters as saying, well, this is what it's going to be. Nothing can possibly change, but it doesn't really work that way. You make adjustments as you need to.
Yeah. Permanent for now, as Dave Roberts would say.
Right.
One thing I wanted to ask you, just from your perspective and kind of the analytics side of things that you sort of master in, how much does infield defense matter? I mean, there's a big thing being made about, like, well, now you've got Max Muncy and Mookie Betts, who hasn't played a ton over there, and Gavin Lux at second baseman is a question. And yet I'm also kind of looking at the Dodgers had one of the worst infield defenses last year, and they won a whole bunch of games in it. I would say not the reason they ended up losing. It may have become the reason they lost eventually later on in the postseason had they advanced. But, like, how much does infield defense matter?
It matters to an extent. I don't think you absolutely must have a great infield defense to be a good team, right?
Yeah.
I don't think you can be a good team if you have a terrible infield defense. The Dodgers were below average. I don't think they were bottom, 5 or anything like that, but it certainly wasn't a strength of their team. And that reflects a little bit of the way the game has gone, right? More strikeouts, more balls in the air, fewer balls in play. So they don't have a great infield defense. They didn't last year. But when I was projecting team defenses a couple weeks ago, who were the top teams? And it's like, okay, the Cubs, the Guardians, the Rangers, the D-backs, they weren't all great teams last year, but at least competitive. And if you look at the absolute bottom of the barrel teams, it's really hard to compete that way. Like, for example, I think I'm maybe the low man on the planet on what the Miami Marlins are going to be this year. I look at them and I see like a 90 loss team. And part of that is because their infield defense just looks dreadful. It's like the worst projected in baseball. I don't think you can win like that unless you really have like elite performance everywhere else, which the Dodgers kind of did, right? That's how they were able to overcome that. So does it matter? Yes. Does it matter as much as pitching, hitting, a whole bunch of other stuff? Probably not.
Yeah. I want to come back to something you said a minute ago. One of the stats you had in your article was that there have only been 13 guys who have played 100 plus games in right field and shortstop, but Mookie is just about the only guy to go from right field to shortstop as he is getting older, rather than from shortstop to right field. You mentioned even how big of a difference there is between second base and shortstop. And so I imagine these things are kind of all related, but what is it about playing shortstop as a 31-year-old that makes this such an outlier? Like, what is even the transition from second base to shortstop? It feels like from a wear and tear perspective could be significant.
Yeah, I mean, you'd like to say that there's just not that many Mookie Betts in baseball history, which I guess is true to some extent. But also the reason this doesn't happen is because why would it happen, right? Guys age, they get slower. And that's happening to Betts too, by the way. He does not have the same top end speed that he had several years ago. And you look at the progression down the defensive spectrum, it goes to easier positions, not to the hardest positions. I mean, there's many guys who play shortstop for a couple of years and they're like, well, you're a third baseman now, right?
Right.
This is not the plan. The Dodgers would tell you probably this was not the plan. Nobody wanted this to happen in this particular way. So I loved them moving him to second base. I think that made a ton of sense. I'm not sure I love this, but I also think it's maybe the best bad option they have at the moment.
Yeah. Talk to me about why you loved the move to second base more than you loved the move to shortstop.
I would say a couple reasons. First is that, a lot of people who are upset about it said, why would you move your best defensive outfielder in baseball to second base? I don't think that's actually true anymore. I think that's reputation based. I think he was elite with Boston. Very good when he first got to the Dodgers. The last year or two, it's been good. No problems, right? But he's slowed down a little bit. He's had the hip injury. I don't think he's like a Gold Glove right fielder right now. I don't think he's better than Jason Hayward. just on defense, obviously not talking about offense. So you move him to second base. He has talked a lot about how he thinks that will save him wear and tear, the running back and forth. I don't know if that's true, but if that's how he feels, great.
Yeah.
But it's also about the value of his bat at second base is astronomical, right?
Yeah.
The value of his bat at right field is already very good. But
Yeah.
the value, if he has a year like he did last year from a middle infield spot, that's like since I looked this up, since World War II or whatever I said, it's like a top 5 position hitting season from that position. You do not find offense like that in the middle infield. So you do that, and then you open up the outfield for potentially bigger bats than Miguel Rojas is generally the idea. So I liked that a lot.
Okay. Well, let's get into the nuts and bolts of this article. You broke it down. He had 90 innings and 46 opportunities last year. He was 6 for 6 on what you called easy plays. He was 0 for 8 on near impossible plays. 1 for 1, I guess, on really hard plays, a good play that he made. And then kind of the key stat here was that he was 27 for 31 on easy grounders, that he had 3 errors on plays that he's expected to make 90% of the time or higher. And this was the number that jumped out to me. His 87% success rate on easy grounders would have been 4% below Ahmed Rosario, who was the lowest rated defensive shortstop last year. So tell me, I know we're describing what happened. You're not necessarily prescribing what is about to happen or predicting what is about to happen. But as you went through this exercise, did your opinion about this experiment, if we want to call it that, change at all?
I don't know if it changed, because my opinion was that he would be a capable, competent shortstop with some potential for upside. I don't think I ever had this idea that he was A, unplayable, or B, going to be a Gold Glover, right? I don't think either of those things are right. But, I'm not usually the kind of person who uses the eye test. I'm not a trained scout or anything like that. But one thing that stood out to me was watching all those plays was that he looked like a shortstop. He didn't look like a guy who was forced to play shortstop. Imagine if you put, I don't know, James Outman or somebody playing a shortstop, you'd be able to see that does not look right. The way you throw the ball is different. Mookie Betts is a baseball player more than he is a right fielder. He's an athlete, right? Yeah. And it looked fine. It looked normal, a lot more than it did when I was watching Gavin Lux play earlier in spring. So that stood out to me. But mostly I wanted to know, what plays couldn't he get to, right? Was it a lack of range? Was it bad footwork? Were balls going through his legs? Because I'm sure I watched him some last year, but I certainly didn't remember all of them. Yeah. And it was like normal baseball stuff. A bad hop caught him in the chest. He rushed a throw against, I think it was Tatis, who's one of the fastest players in baseball, and he threw it away. Like, those are normal baseball things that can happen. Yeah. Totally to be expected from someone who's inexperienced. But to go back to the number you had, the bar for infield defense right now is so good. Old timers love to say, guys today can't play infield. Go back to Ozzie Smith, Luis Aparicio, I don't know, whatever your era was. And it's like, these guys are really, really good. Yeah. And if there's anything I've learned from evaluating defense, it's that people love highlight plays. That's what'll make the top 10, but just catch the ball. Just get the plays you're supposed to make. Dansby Swanson, I think, is a great example of that. He doesn't do much spectacular to the eye test, but he never messes up. And that is incredibly valuable. It's not reasonable to ask Betts to do that. But if he can turn that, 87% success rate into 93%, that's a huge step. And with that offense, it'll make him a superstar. He's already a superstar, but continue to be a superstar.
No, I think that point is what grabbed me the most in your article. You had another quote that said, and that really is the game here. Betts isn't there to make spectacular plays. Most shortstops don't make those plays most of the time. The question is really about how many of the standard plays he can make. Because if we look at those considered to be 90% likely or higher, of which a regular shortstop will see hundreds of times a year, then the margins for success is very narrow. And to me, it's exactly like you said. What being able to watch Mookie Betts, the question is not, is he going to look like Derek Jeter out there, which I know is kind of a funny comp for 100 different reasons. But it's more so like, when the ball is hit to him, do we forget that Mookie Betts isn't supposed to be playing shortstop? It's not like, oh my gosh, he made the highlight play. It's, oh yeah, he just did the thing we expected him to do, and we take for granted all of the time. So from your perspective, I think you've kind of hinted at the answer, but are you betting on that he will figure that piece out?
Well, I am. I'm also not betting he's actually playing 162 games at shortstop. Okay. There will be some games where Lux is out, Rojas comes in, Mookie plays second. I would expect some kind of trade later in the year, Willie Adames or somebody like that. So it's hard to project because I'm not really sure how much this is actually going to happen. But in terms of what he does when he plays at shortstop, I am expecting playable, solid, capable, not elite. And I don't think anyone's suggesting this is going to be peak, Ray Ordonez or whatever, but he'll make the plays he needs to play. He'll make the plays he needs to make. And I think that'll be good enough. And we won't be talking about this as much in a month, other than to praise him for like, hey, how cool is this? I don't think we'll be worried about the defense from that point of view. Even though like you combine him with Max Muncy, it's not the greatest left side defense,
to say the least.
But it's going to be okay, and they're going to be so good in every other aspect of the game. I think it's going to be more of a story about the greatness of Mookie Betts and not about, oh my God, this guy can't play shortstop, because I don't think that's likely.
Well, and it's funny to me because, and again, as somebody who follows the Dodgers like yourself, take Miguel Rojas out. It's not like we've seen Gold Glove defense from a Dodgers shortstop in the last decade. Corey Seager for like 5 straight years was like, when are they going to move this guy to third? And then Trey Turner came and it was like, what position is this guy supposed to be playing defensively? So it's like, in some ways, I think Mookie Betts is going to fit right into the Dodger history of shortstops, bar sort of the Cesar Arturas of the world.
I'm glad you said Asturias, because while you were speaking, I was racking my brain trying to think of, like, aside from Rojas, who's like the last really good Dodger shortstop. Well, it's not Hanley Ramirez, right? No, I'm like trying to go back through history. Asturias was 30 years ago. I'd like to think there was a good one since, but maybe not. 20 years ago? What was that?
Yeah. No, I can't. I mean, Rafael Furcal, I know he was kind of, I don't know. I don't think of Furcal as like, I think he was better than a lot of the other guys we just mentioned as far as Dodgers shortstops, but Turris feels like the last guy that was there for his defense. And that was, we all have the memories of Vin Scully talking about Cesar Turris playing shortstop. And I think that's what sticks with me.
Yeah. I kind of liked Justin Sellers for a minute, but I don't think that was ever going to last.
There you go. Real quick, a couple big picture Dodgers things that I'm just curious about. What have been your what are the storylines you're most interested in? Like, are you intrigued by Glasnow and Yamamoto? Is there like maybe a lesser known player that you're tracking? Obviously, Ohtani is sort of the elephant in the room, so to speak. But as you're tracking the Dodgers through the next 3 or 4 weeks, what are the things you're keeping an eye on?
Yeah, isn't it interesting to think that one of the best and most elite and dominant strikeout pitchers in baseball feels like he's sort of going under the radar a little bit? Yeah. And that's Glasnow, right? Yeah,
crazy.
Obviously, health is always the issue. So he's reportedly been working on a sinker this spring. So he's extremely vertical. Everything is up and down. You got the fastball, you got the cutter or slider in the middle, and the curveball low, and like that's it. So he's going to have something with break. I'm very interested to see that. Obviously, health is always going to be it, but there's a world where he throws 180 like amazing innings and wins the Cy Young. That's not out of the question, and nobody's talking about him because of all the other, Betts is a shortstop, and Ohtani is here, and Yamamoto, and all this other stuff. He's number one on the hit list for me. I'm really interested to see what he does.
Well, I mean, come on, he's only the third most expensive guy that they added this offseason, Mike. We don't have time to deal with these guys that are making less than $300 million. We have a $300 million shortstop. We have the most expensive pitcher in baseball, and that Ohtani guy.
Yeah, that's right. As one of the Cardinals pitchers said the other day, the Dodgers are playing checkbook baseball, and that's why the World Series last year featured the Mets.
Yeah. Don't get me started on the Mikolas quote. It's like, come on, like of the guy who's getting paid an outrageous amount of money for, subpar production. I think we can safely say, to be the guy who calls that out. It was comical to me. Last one here. Biggest concern. I mean, the obvious one is health. Is there a player that maybe you feel like Dodgers fans might be too high on that you're worried about, or anything along those lines?
Worried is an interesting question. I mean, it's health, right? Like, what are you going to get out of Paxton? A lot of this, I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but it's like you make the pieces work. You have some amount of James Paxton, and then you have Clayton Kershaw, and then you go make a trade, right? Yeah. The biggest worry on the team, I think, is pretty clearly going to be infield defense until they prove it's not. Pitching health, yes, I think they've managed to get some depth. And otherwise, it's like nothing's guaranteed. I don't actually think they're the best team in the league. I think the Braves are slightly better, but it's going to be a good season. They're going to win a lot of games.
I love it. Well, Mike, let folks know where they can find you and where your content is. And as we close out here.
Yeah, MLB.com, Twitter at Mike_Petriello. Going to do some ESPN StatCast games later in the year. So I'm everywhere.
I love it. Well, Mike, thank you for everything. And folks, thanks for watching. Again, this is Dodger Heads presented by DodgerBlue.com. Tons of opening day content and afterwards. So make sure you stay tuned right here to the Dodger Blue 1958 YouTube page. Enjoy the rest of your day, folks. And as always, go Dodgers.